Coming up next on 60 Minutes.
It never made sense to me at all.
Why Audrey Griffin didn't stand a chance.
He's a vicious animal.
Something was very off that night. He was so aggressive.
The wife of the man who murdered the 19-year-old
He was on his way to kill you.
reveals his life of violence.
They should have put him in jail after breaching his second AVO.
Hello again and welcome to our 60 Minutes podcast, Extra Minutes. My name is Dimity Clancy and joining me today is our producer, Natalie Clancy. And we're talking today about a story that touched all of us, outraged the country, still is sitting with me, a number of weeks after we covered this story. And I think it's because there are so many things about this story that resonate with a lot of people. You've got a beautiful girl, Audrey, who was 19 years old. You have her beautiful parents. You have a judicial system. You have, a police force. And everybody, there were so many people that were wound up in this story. I think it affects everybody because at the very bottom line of this story, of Audrey's story, is that it could have been any one of us. So Nat, maybe just start by just taking us through what Audrey was doing that night, how she ended up in the dead of night by herself and in the path of Adrian Torrens, who would go on to kill her.
She'd been out in the Central Coast with her friends because she was about to join the Navy on the 7th of April. So she was having a final farewell with some of her friends from the coast. And she'd left the Gosford Hotel in the early hours of Sunday morning and was trying, we think, to get an Uber home, but couldn't. So started walking. And that's when she would tragically cross paths with Adrian Torrens.
Gosh, you can't imagine that moment where Audrey's walking along at Erina Creek there and she realises, we'll never know what happened to her, but that moment of that fear of going, this man's either after me or that something was terribly wrong.
That's right. And while we don't know what he did to her exactly, we know that she was aware something was wrong because they found his DNA under her fingertips. So she fought back. So just knowing that she fought back means that she must have realised she was in trouble. And I think it's understandable that that moment of her realising something was really wrong is what really tortures her parents.
And I think one of the really scary things for me was how hard Audrey's parents had to fight to get the truth. The coroner came out straight away and said that Audrey died of misadventure, that it was an accident, that she'd fallen into that creek. That's what the police officers, the local police officers up on the Central Coast ran with. And that was the information that they were given.
By the coroner.
So it was then up to, Audrey's parents they knew in their gut that something wasn't right, that their daughter was fit. She'd run marathons, she was fit and healthy, and there was no way that could have just happened. And, the DNA, as you say, under her fingers, the scratches on her, they're the sort of things that they were bringing up with the police. Why didn't police respond to this and investigate it further?
The interview with Karen Webb showed that she says the local police were suspicious. And although the initial report from the coroner said there was no foul play, they were still investigating because they just weren't sure. But I think there's no question that Audrey's parents were left in a position where they felt not enough was being done and that this case was being dismissed as misadventure when they knew something wasn't right. And I think anyone who watched the story would have felt that and also felt really disappointed that parents who are in such a distressing position trying to deal with their grief also felt like they had to do a lot of the digging themselves to find out what went wrong.
We asked the police commissioner why was the homicide squad not brought in, and you would like to think, I think the word she used was they were there for consulting. I can tell you now, if my child had been, killed or body had been found in those sort of circumstances, you would think that, there would be more than just consulting with homicide detectives.
I was thinking about this too because, from my perspective, working on a story like this, the position that I think I related to the most was Audrey's, seeing myself in her position. But you've got two little girls yourself. You could also really relate to her mum. And do you think that kind of informed your position coming into some of these interviews as well, that you could see it from both sides?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, something you can't stop as a journalist, and you try to put yourself in the parents' shoes all the time, but you have these glimpses of thinking, what if that was my child? how would I be? And I can tell you, I would be down there banging on that police station door saying, please do more, please do more. I wouldn't be happy, with no public announcement about, could there be any more answers that we need to find? Because I'm sure Audrey's parents would have been told that this case still has to go towards the coroner. And when somebody dies, a case always goes to the coroner for assessment. And so they would have been collecting some evidence purely because that's protocol and that's what they have to do. But, you have to ask yourself, would they have thrown more at it? And I think they're the big questions around this case is, would more have been done sooner and in those days after Audrey's body was found, if this was treated as a homicide investigation? But as Karen Webb, the New South Wales Police Commissioner, would say, could more have been done? Yes, but did we catch a killer? And you have to give it to the cops that, as soon as they realised, and even if they, should have realised sooner, they did throw everything at it and they did have Adrian Torrens arrested and charged with murder within 4 days.
Absolutely. It's not a cold case that's going to sit unsolved for decades with a family wondering what happened or where their daughter might be.
Absolutely. And you see that so often. So I think maybe they take some comfort, Audrey's parents might take some comfort in the fact that they have some answers. But of course, 3 days in custody and Adrian Torrens took his life. You can't imagine as a parent never knowing the why, and whether they would have known the why ever, who knows? Because whether he was taken to trial or taken to court, they may not have ever have been given the why, and he might not have ever offered that up. But they're never going to know now.
I think the other devastating thing about this story is what it says about the justice system.
Why should we accept as society that a man like Adrian Torrens is allowed to walk the streets? Why should anybody is put at risk with Adrian Torrens, the man like Adrian Torrens on the street? Every single person, whether he's not under the influence of drugs, whether he's not drunk, everybody is at risk when someone is released into the community like that. So the big question is, how do we have a system that is allowing 60,000?
Yeah, the New South Wales Police told us that it was in basically in the last 3 years, 60,000 people with criminal records had been given community correction orders, which is essentially a prison term but served in the community.
Yeah.
So there are 60,000 people who might have a violent history who are, as the Commissioner said, given a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Yeah.
I think there was another 30,000 people who were given intensive correction orders, which are a similar type of thing. So that's like 100,000 people with criminal histories who have been given a get-out-of-jail-free card.
And what are the factors when a judge is deciding whether to give someone a CCO or send them to jail? What are the factors that they take into account to allow them back out? Especially someone like Adrian Torrens, who was a repeat offender, a violent offender who committed multiple domestic violence crimes.
That's a question the Police Commissioner asked herself and was quite strong on saying that soft sentences are an issue in New South Wales. But on her, we see the Police Commissioner a lot in press conferences and that type of thing, but she doesn't often sit down for a long-form interview like this. Why do you think she did on this occasion?
I think it is a topic of her, like she's passionate about women and women's safety. I think that when it came to this story and it came to the questions over the police investigation and the way, it came out publicly that Audrey, had died because of an accident, and then it was absolutely the opposite of that. I think Karen Webb had no choice in this one. And I've been doing police reporting for a long time, and I know when Kate, they just have to stand up. She had to get up on this one and answer questions.
And I think she, to her credit, she admitted that in the interview. She said, I think we need to be transparent and I need to explain to the community what happened here. And as she said, how in the end we did catch a killer.
And I mean, you also wondered, 2 days later she resigns, it comes out that she's going to resign from the police force. Did she do it because, I'm going to give one slap to the judicial system on my way out because that's how I really feel? And really, the things that the Commissioner said in our interview, every police officer out there would be thinking and feeling the same thing. Every grieving parent, every victim of a crime would not disagree with her.
And as she said, this issue with community corrections orders and people who are given a get out of jail free card, those people then become a policing problem because they reoffend.
Yeah.
So even when you take away the pain of grieving families and the danger to other members of the community, it's just a resourcing issue for the cops as well to have so many repeat offenders on the streets.
What's the quick fix though? How do you make it safer for people tomorrow? It is one of those things that's going to take huge legislative change. And it won't be fixed tomorrow. And that does not provide great comfort for victims out there, for parents like Audrey's parents, for anyone who should really have the right to walk home safely at night.
Absolutely. And I think too, when you do a story like this, obviously it is quite, the subject matter is really difficult because it's so distressing and it's painful for the people who we're talking to. What is it about this story that you think will stick with you?
The injustice. I think it's the injustice to Audrey. I think the injustice to her parents.
In the sense that this man was on the streets?
That this man was on the streets, that this man would even walking around. And it's frightening. It's frightening to think that one day one of my children or any child would go out and have such a great night when they're about to embark on their beautiful career in the Navy, that they've worked hard. She was a good kid. You only have to look at a picture of her to see that Audrey was a great kid. And that happens? That's how your life ends at 19 years of age? I mean, that's
horrendous.
That is horrendous. And something has to change about that picture.
And I think that's why her parents have been so strong in speaking up. You can tell how much pain they're in and that they're broken people. But despite that, it's quite incredible, really, to see how much strength they could find to speak. And I think you've just nailed exactly why they have, because they agree with what you just said.
And I think about it at night when I go home from doing an interview like that, and I think to myself, if you were in that position, how do you muster up the courage to sit there? And I know they do it for their daughter, and I know they do it for the next family who could face a situation like that. But when you looking into Audrey's mum, Kathleen's eyeballs, and the pain and the sheer strength it took for her to say a sentence about it and to talk about it, you have to just give it to those parents, because they're the ones that resonate. When you watch that story, they're the ones that make you go, hang on, maybe we should fix this. And you hope that anybody who's got the power to make change in the government and to make it better so that people like Adrian Torrens aren't walking the street and harassing and terrorising his ex-wife, then please do something, and that's, that's what the journalism is about here. The journalism can be a very powerful thing in a situation like this, because it's laid bare for everybody to see a parent's raw moment, the worst time in their life when their world has crumbled around them. Look at that family and please do something to make it better.
You can't watch those parents and not be moved by them, I think, no matter what position you're in. So whether you're somebody watching at home who's got no connection, or whether you're somebody with the power to do something about it, there's no question that they've got to have an impact.
And also to young people. I mean, what message does that happening to Audrey's friends send? Like, what message does it send to her friends who were sitting there? They were probably out having a great night with her that night. What does it tell you about society? It is such like an awful reflection of what can happen, and I think that's why these stories just stay with people, because you sit there in disbelief that
I know it stayed with us.
It
kept both of us up at night.
Oh, absolutely. And you go to bed and you think about it, and and you hope that when doing a story like that, for as awful as it is and as important as it is, does it make people a little bit more vigilant? Does it make people think twice, or does it make?
But it shouldn't have to.
It shouldn't have to see a story like that. But does it make offenders think twice? That if I don't change my life, or and we don't know the extent of Adrian Torrens, life and what he dealt with, but does it make everybody to think twice and go, we really need to do whatever it is, offender, victim, mum, dad, anybody, to go, let's not let that happen again. And we hope that that's what that story did.
I think too, regardless of what any systemic changes might be in the future, Audrey's parents and also Michelle, Adrian's estranged wife, can find some comfort, hopefully, in knowing that they've started a really important conversation, at the very least. And they've got people talking about this and caring about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and that's the best anyone can do, right? Is to talk about things. Talk about things. How can we improve it and how can we make it better? Because nobody deserves for that to happen.
The sadness of a story like this is obviously quite intense, and we turned it around pretty quickly within a week. What is it, I guess, about the making of this story or telling it that you think will stay with you?
Well, you know, at 60 Minutes, we always have to do the full story. So with cases like this, where somebody is charged with murder, quite often we, as 60 Minutes, we will wait until the entire case is finished, because when you come on the program, you need to speak open and freely, and sometimes the legal restrictions won't allow that for families. And you want it to be resolved and you want it to be the end of the case. But this one ended quite abruptly when Adrian Torrance took his life. Once that happened, it kind of changed everything for us. And so suddenly we were having to chase the story that we could tell tomorrow. And
because we didn't have to wait for his court processes to finish. No. Because he was gone.
Yeah, because he was gone. I think we started filming on the Tuesday. We filmed from Tuesday to Friday, and along the way, putting it together as we went, and we did that commissioner interview on the Friday, and then got it ready and finished it off on the Saturday. So, yeah, it's a hard one, because you don't really think about it really, like you have to get the job done, but it's when you stop and when we went home on that Saturday afternoon that it starts to kind of hit you, and I guess you start to work through those feelings of what you felt along the way, that may have been a little bit masked because we had to work so quickly.
Two of the things that I think will stick with me are things her dad said. One of them was when you'd asked her dad, and I don't think this was actually in the story that went to air, but you'd asked her dad what he missed or what he thought he would miss, and he said that sometimes he'd get home from work and find that she'd left him dinner in the oven. She'd gone out, but she'd made him something and left it in the oven. That really got me.
Yeah. Because
that's something I would do for my dad.
It's those simple little things that everyday life that are gone.
Totally.
And are gone because of a violent man who shouldn't have been on the streets.
And it's just the look in their eyes too, I think. That sort of strong but broken look of glassy-eyed.
Yeah.
You would have felt it much more than we did because you were opposite them.
Oh, absolutely.
But I just feel like you could feel everything they were feeling just by looking in their eyes.
Yeah. But you never know how you're going to be if something so horrendous would happen to you. And I think that, Audrey would be extremely proud of Kathleen and Trevor.
Absolutely.
For standing up and doing it for her and doing it for other people, because I just get the sense that the beautiful people that her parents are were who she was. And we never got to meet her, but we've seen those beautiful videos. She was full of fun. She, they had that killer, beautiful smile.
And so much ahead of her.
So much ahead of her. I mean, she was about to start a career in the Navy, for God's sake. This was a kid who was switched on. She was driven. She was fit. And then it's just all gone. And it shouldn't have.
No, it shouldn't have.
Well, as we said, it will be a story that stays with us for a long time. Thank you, Natty, for coming on. And if you missed the story, you can catch it on our 60 Minutes YouTube page or 9 Now. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.